But welcome everyone who's tuning in today and those who will tune in after the fact for the recorded version of this chat today. We're looking forward to digging into customer education with Evan, and we've also got Josh on. We're going to basically, as usual, have a nice casual conversation about a topic that we feel will be valuable for you, and dig into some pieces of how this works inside an organization with Evan. I'm Jamie. I've co-hosted these before, so you might have seen me previously. I work at Bongo with Josh, and I'm helping basically put together some strategy behind some of the things we do and connect the dots. So I have this funny role that I call myself the Chief Dot Connector. And there you are. So Evan, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Evan Hall, and I work in customer education. And we'll talk a bit more about what that is as we go. But specifically for B2B SaaS companies is where I get really excited. I've been doing that for about 10 years. Before that, I worked in accounting for 10 years and then kind of had a career pivot. But as we get into the conversation today, I think you'll see where that accounting background kind of plays into my the approach that I've taken and the way I like to think about metrics that are important and how to look at them.
Awesome. And Josh?
Yep. And hello, everyone. I'm Josh Camrath. I'm the CEO of Bongo. So we're a structured video assessment tool that has people demonstrate skills or competencies and basically demonstrate they have an authentic representation of what they're supposed to know.
Awesome. So as per your point, Evan, how about we start with what is customer education? Because I think some people might not be clear on that.
Absolutely. So customer education is all about giving users of your product the tools to succeed. And I would go beyond that and say that it is a guided effort, and it's almost more of a mentality than anything else. It's a field that has the power to engage cross-functionally and really enhance what sales, marketing, success, support, any customer-facing go-to-market team. Education can support what they're doing, both through the learning methodologies, but also through a lot of the systems like learning management systems that typically education functions oversee. So they can be your best friend if you let them.
Nice. And it seems like, just from what I've been kind of noticing over the last couple of years, it's becoming a bigger piece of the kind of pie, so to speak, in a company. So for you, what is the benefit and advantage of having a good customer education strategy in a company?
Yeah, I think customer education becomes really powerful for a company when they start taking a very customer focused look, and when they say we want to create a holistic experience for the customer, because again, like I was saying, customer education really powers all of those different check marks. But when a company is at the point where they say we want to actually lay out the life cycle map for a customer, from through the sales process, through implementation, onboarding, the phrase everboarding is becoming very popular. Where it's like customers are constantly either bringing on new teammates or having to learn new features. So it's like every day is day one of learning what you don't know. And so having a team that can create purpose to that, to say, here is that journey that we want the customer that we think the customer wants to go through. How can we help them through that journey? How can we bring in the efforts of other teams to do that? They're struggling. Support can help them. They need more of a helping hand. Success can help them, and so on.
Yeah, and it sounds like, based on that sort of, especially the journey piece, that you are touching a lot of sort of segments of the business and other departments, like sales, like user experience, like education. Like there's a lot going on there. So for you, when you're digging in and you're thinking, for example, what's the journey and how am I going to help, and then dig in and do the thing, what sort of questions are you asking?
Sure. Yeah. So certainly specific to software companies, I would say that any software company that's worth its salt is doing something unconventional, something new, something the market hasn't seen. And because of that, your customers need to want to find a new way of doing things, and they may not know what that that new way is.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you are used to using a hammer to hammer a nail and you lose your hammer, to go to the store, exactly what you need. You're going to buy a new hammer. But if you're buying a new software tool, especially with AI now everywhere, you maybe don't know what you need or even how to define the problem. And that's where education can help guide you toward identifying what it is that you're trying to solve for. And so that begins then when I say solve for, that's where we start to get into metrics, like what do you want to solve for? What's important to you? And that's going to be different for everyone. And even when I say everyone, who is everyone? Everyone can be the customers. What are they trying to get out of the product? Mm-hmm. It can be internal to the company. What are all the different teams, trying to, what needles are they trying to move in order to, meet their goals and internal expectations? And so figuring out what those outcomes need to be is just a methodical process of asking why. Like, why are we doing this? And if you don't love the answer, you dig deeper until you feel like you're comfortable with the purpose behind what you're doing.
Yeah, that Josh is nodding his head because that makes a lot of sense for us.
For sure.
Like you said, with the AI or a tool that is a bit newer or has a newer approach, it is our experience currently that sometimes we are doing more education than selling because we're just helping people understand what's possible with something that didn't maybe exist before in their workflow. So you're right. It can be very new for a lot of people. I love that hammer analogy, actually. And so where are you finding, so I'm guessing like there's going to be metrics involved, like you mentioned. Where are you finding or how are you finding the data? Because you said like you're a numbers guy previously, and where do you dig for these things?
Certainly it depends on the size of your organization. So depending on who's listening in, if you're at a company with 50 people or a company with 50,000, like, guess what? You've got different resources available to you. But ultimately you can only work with the numbers you have, which I don't know, kind of a Zen comment maybe. So the first thing to ask is what's available to me. It's good to, you can also say, well, what do I wish I knew? But wishing you had access to something maybe doesn't do a lot of good. So starting with what exists now can help sort of reverse engineer what might be important to the organization. And I'd love to maybe hear from Josh a bit here. But like, if, for example, if I walked into Bongo's office and looked around at the things being measured today, that would tell me something about what had been prioritized in the past. What in the past was interesting, where Josh and the people supporting him said, we need a good way to measure XYZ. And that would tell me something, regardless of what I maybe wanted to look for. It would tell me something about what was important to the people there. Josh, I don't know if I did walk in like that, like, what would I find? What would I find you being really laser focused on watching with a lot of accuracy?
Yeah, I would say, and I guess I agree with you that it depends a lot on the size of the company and the stage, the company life cycle stage. Are they in fast growth mode, or do they have 15,000 customers already? So context matters a lot, I would say. But if I were to zoom out at the most macro level, the things that are, I would say, most important are MRR or ARR, right? So revenue, recurring revenue, and looking at things that are either adding more revenue or adding more utility to the existing customer base. Because if it's adding more utility, then lots of good things also happen, right? They're either ensures retention, could lead to expansion, either within that customer or as a referral. And so that's a big, I would say, driver. From again, it depends on the context, right? So there's the macro level of like, is the company growing and are we making a bigger impact? And then, within each department, there's specific metrics. So again, just kind of keeping towards like sales or customer facing metrics, like what is the customer lifetime value, and the cost of the customer to acquire a new customer. And then a bunch of elements that are like centered around that, right? So things like, how quickly or how lengthy is the onboarding process, right? What's the time to value for a new customer? So there's, all of those things are I guess, metrics that are measured here at Bongo.
I'll maybe jump onto that last one. That time to value is the way I often hear it described. But how long does it take somebody to get onboarded, start seeing, that hey, there's a reason we're paying for this product. And so an example, using that as an example, one way to look at that is what is our customer's current time to value, but then the other half of that equation is what does good look like? What is our benchmark? So already now, when you talk about metrics, here's two distinct paths to look down. It's how do we know what to aim for, and how do we know what's actually happening? Because you need both of those to really get a sense, like knowing the time to value isn't that useful if you don't have a framework from which to tell the story of this is really good or this is really bad or something in between.
Yeah, well, I absolutely agree with that, and also organizations can use that data typically, even in like a multi-phased approach, right? So people that are in this category, these things should probably happen, and customers that are onboarded really quickly, like maybe it's a different set of workflows or things that should be focused on. So it's, it can lead to a lot more efficient behavior too, both for internally within, like Bongo, for instance, but externally too, in terms of like making recommendations or suggestions or, plans on how to approach different types of customers.
And so, Evan, in terms of figuring out, for example, so I like this piece that you're talking about. So time to value, yes, is important because you want people to be in there. You want them to be using the tool, the service, the product, etc., but in the right way for the things that matter to them. So is there a sort of a way you go about exploring and uncovering that?
So I think, and this is where one of the defining parts of customer education is that it's a proactive, purposeful endeavor. It's a complement to technical documentation and a support structure, because if a customer knows what they need, they can go and read the documentation, ask a customer rep. It's when they don't know what they need or they only have part of the picture that education efforts can help guide them. So what that means as customer educators is we have to be really in tune with the customers and what they want. Like, what are the outcomes that they are trying to get? And then how do we work backward from that to know, okay, for this archetypal customer, what's the journey that's going to get them there? Just like, you imagine back in school, you'd go into a new semester of a class and the teacher's got the whole path laid out, right? Because they know at the end of that semester, here's the things that they want you to be proficient in. But you're doing that over a long period of time, and it's the teacher's job to plan out that journey to get you there in a reasonable amount of time, so you're not hopefully pulling your hair out. And so the answer to your question is just being very methodical about what's that endpoint, and then working backward from there to fill in the details that get you there, and just being honest with yourself of, do I have a good answer for how the customer is getting A to B, B to C, C to D, and if you don't feel like you have a good answer, you got to work harder at it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I did like too how you said that one, and we talked about this previously, you and I as well, this piece of like, what are the metrics that already exist? And I remember, and if you wouldn't mind sharing maybe why you decided to go down that road versus going after the metrics you originally thought you wanted to get.
Yeah, the last company I was at, I had these grand plans to tap into the company's data lake. This company did a really awesome job of collecting an insane amount of minute usage data in the app. The data was there, but getting to it is very difficult, and it wasn't enough to for me to sit down with the person who oversaw data governance and pitch them on why it would be useful. They said, yeah, that's a great idea. They said, but it's going to be a long time till we can get that on the roadmap. So it doesn't mean it's not worth doing, but it means you can't just sit around for months and twiddle your thumbs, right? So you always need a plan B, plan C. And so that's where I started to really embrace that idea of looking for what exists today, like the path of least resistance. If there's something that's being measured with accuracy again, like that's very important. And maybe that's me with my accountant hat on again, but like garbage numbers, that's almost worse than having no numbers at all, because now you're just like, heading off the cliff saying, I'm sure everything's fine. The GPS said to keep driving. I see a lake, but it told me to keep driving. So and so being able to, first make sure that whatever numbers you're looking at are not just accurate, but within the right, being framed correctly. I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. I think it's very tempting. At least I've seen myself do this. I've seen people around me do it, to equate more with good, and that's not always true. If you imagine, the way a lot of software products work, it would be tempting to say like, oh, well, if the user is not clicking into this area of the product, that's bad, because we want them, they should be using it. They'll be happier if they use it. But then some people say, well, if not using the feature is bad, this person who's using it 100 times, that must be really good. But somewhere in the middle there is really the sweet spot, because that person who's clicking on the feature 100 times, they might just be mashing the button, right? Like they might be really incredibly frustrated and hating the product because it's not doing what they expected. They're not getting the outcome that they wanted. And so then you start saying, well, it's like, 0 is bad, too many is bad. How do I know what that, that middle ground is? And so that's part of that questioning you do. And you might get to a point, and I reach this as well at times, where you look at it and say, like, I know that the good number is in the middle here, but I don't have a good way to measure it right now. So that's when you maybe table it and move on to something that you do have. But making sure that you're very conscious of why that number is important to you, and also what might be throwing it off or causing noise around it.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I know there's quite a few tools I've used in my life where there's things I have to tap that I wish I didn't have to. Right. So like to your point, if a team behind the scenes was measuring my use of that thing, thinking, oh, he really likes this feature, it might just be, I don't actually have another choice, but I would prefer it not to be that way. So that's a good point, but it makes me also make an assumption that discovering these pieces, you're probably talking to the customer quite frequently, I guess.
Yeah, it's and it's funny, because I think one of the things certainly I have had to work through in the past, and I think others in the field do as well, is as an educator, you typically find that you're at least a teeny bit more informed than the person you're teaching, because that's if you were less informed, you wouldn't be in that position. But you also have to stay humble, because it's like, on the one hand, you've got the position of power of knowledge, but they've got the position of power in terms of their desired outcomes are what matter. Like you as an educator mean nothing if you're not enabling them. And so keeping that right balance between, staying very in tune to what they need, which may not be what you have or what and getting ready to just throw out what you're doing and pivot, depending on their needs.
And for most customer education, like sort of strategies or projects, I'm not really sure necessarily the word I'm thinking of here, but what might be the biggest challenge, do you think, outside of like this capturing data?
I mean, so getting the data is hard, and therefore the challenge is showing those results. You know, a lot of education initiatives are often very long term, but it can take a while to start to demonstrate those results. So, you know, the challenge a lot of education teams face is that patience, which is why, you know, looking at initiatives that help teams with what they're doing today, I think is a good way to balance those efforts of doing a little bit of work for today, a little bit of work for tomorrow. You know, most software companies take a very, you know, iterative approach to quick release and adapt. And I think, you know, education really can be the same. I hear a lot of my peers describe education as a product. And I think that's correct. That you know, you need to find the small wins, and then those level up to the big. And if you try and create a big behemoth, then, you know, the circumstances are probably going to change before you actually start to see the results from that.
Nice. I like it. And I do believe as well, in our initial conversation, you had also said one of the things that you were doing when you went from department to department, trying to kind of find that existing data, was also just asking the question, how can we help you?
Yeah. You know, my experience is a lot of folks, just like at the start of this call, don't know what customer education is, and that's fine. It's definitely a growing field. You know, it was notable to me last year when Gainsight purchased an LMS called NorthPass. That for me was indicated the big moment where I think customer education will start to become a lot more top of mind for companies, especially once you know, there's a lot of good AI work. I think a lot of companies, not Bongo obviously, but companies that are just like, hey, how can we tack some AI onto what we're doing? They're going to realize that better left to companies that take it seriously and have it be an actual like core part of what they're doing. And then they're going to say, well, what should we be doing? And they're going to recognize that, you know, long-term customer health really comes from acting purposefully. But yeah, you know, I mentioned that education runs. It's maybe the one field that really stays with the customer all throughout their life cycle with the company. And so they have a chance to help any team that's got a customer facing touch point. Either whether it's, you know, building resources that are on demand, so it takes off, you know, that kind of like, if you imagine someone in success that's having the same conversation over and over and over and over again, you know, the education team can make some content that, you know, is on demand and allow them to focus on, you know, whatever the unique nuances of the conversation instead of repeating themselves.
Yeah, good point.
I was just going to say, you know, that's, I think, like a great example of just making something more scalable. And from my perspective, you know, when I, you know, have chats with folks that are in customer ed, one of the you know, certainly there's a lot of activities, and it's so cross-functional that it can become this big behemoth. But you know, like I was mentioning, you know, when you asked first, like, what are some of the metrics I look at? Like, ultimately, every company's, you know, the fundamental metric they're measured on is revenue. So if, you know, kind of start to you know, double click into that or peel the onion back a little bit, you know, ultimately what most departments are measured on is like the ROI of that activity, and is the juice worth the squeeze? And you know, what you just mentioned, Evan, is something that you know, sometimes it's the juice is getting more revenue. Sometimes it's making more, you know, our colleagues more efficient, or different departments more efficient. And you know, that's really an area that Bongo has been working towards empowering organizations, is to, you know, have there be defensible evidence and here's a tool that can justify ROI. But if you're able to tie projects or work back to that, again, like any company, those projects are going to be the ones that get funded and get attention and get people promotions. So it's, so naturally, it's an area we should be, emphasizing and looking at.
Yeah, I think Josh, like one of the things that I've noticed with people using Bongo in the customer ed space is that we're helping them scale. We're giving them that ability to scale and grow and make a wider impact with like the same amount of people, so to speak, because the tool comes in and takes, I believe, some really useful stuff off their plate that frees them up to then dig into other pieces of what they would like to be doing if they weren't so, in the weeds with some other stuff that I believe Bongo takes off their plate. So that's great. I see just time-wise, we're almost done. I think at the 30-minute mark, StreamYard kind of does the chop. So before we go, is there one other maybe piece of advice you have for the audience, Evan?
One of the things that we talked about before that didn't come up is like knowing the audience. So, it was great hearing from Josh from that, high level, hopefully whatever company you're at, the CEO is being real clear about the metrics that, the company needs to achieve. But like, if you are a creator, if you are, maybe not a manager of people, like, how do you know how that affects what you're doing? And I think helping connect those dots between the metrics that you do that matter to your daily work versus your team's work versus the overall company is also that framing is really important. A classic example with education is NPS scores, right? If I'm running education webinars and I'm doing an NPS survey at the end, maybe like maybe I'm getting great scores, maybe not, like, but ultimately that's a metric for the team. It's like it's a way for the team to check and see like which of our presenters are doing better or worse, or how can we improve. But if I put that NPS score on a slide in front of Josh, he's probably going to politely say, Evan, I don't care. Like, good job, buddy. But, there's not a real, unless I somehow can demonstrate a clear link between NPS and revenue, it's distraction. And so, understanding the audience and when you are focusing on, one metric versus another and why, because no metric is meaningful without the context around it.
Yeah, I love it. And I think Josh would politely tell you that.
Yeah, I was, totally agree. Right. It's, and Jamie, you mentioned, being a chief dot connector, like that is what data is, right? It's whether it's NPS or MRR or, lifetime value, like, or usage data, right? Like they're just signals and points, typically points in time that help you tell a story. So, knowing the audience and what that audience or that persona cares about, then crafting or telling a story to cater to that persona, that's how to get your point across, or how to be a good communicator, and how to have it be, like, again, kind of cross-functional or collaborative when you're able to tell a story around something.
Yeah, well, great. Well, thanks for spending time with me today, you guys, and I look forward to hearing what people's input is on watching this later or even today. So thanks for joining us, whoever joined us today and in future, but we'll see you next time.
Awesome, thanks. See ya.